guys, it's Tomatoda. Today, I'm here to share a few tips on how to prevent your canes from smooshing when you slice. I personally don't think you can 100% eliminate smooshing or warping unless maybe you have a special molded contraption, but what you can do is lessen the amount of smooshing so that you only need to lightly retouch or reshape the cane slice. Also, this is a more in-depth video because I'm going to talk a lot more, but if you want a condensed summary video, I'll have like a minute-long short-form version of this in my shorts/reel/TikTok/whatever. And before I share these tips, I do want to let you guys know that these are the tips that have worked for me. Crafting is unfortunately not always a one-size-fits-all situation, so take whatever information that works for you and leave behind what doesn't work for you. If you have any other specific tips that I did not go over, let me know in the comments below. If you don't have any other tips to share, then comment just the tip in the comment section below for funsies. Tip number 1. Make sure that the brand of polymer clay you're using is pretty firm, because firm is the opposite of squishy, right? The two brands I recommend that is easier or was easier to get in stores in America are Sculpey Primo and FIMO Professional/FIMO Effect. Kato brand is also known to be firm, but you can only buy it online. I personally exclusively use FIMO Professional because it's a lot firmer than Primo, but when I first started clay canes, I did use Primo because I actually liked the Primo brand for sculpting, and that's what I did for like the beginning of my polymer clay journey, and so it's just what I had on hand, right? But over time, I phased out the Primo, and now everything is FIMO Professional and Effect, because majority of my works are now polymer clay canes. Sadly though, after the panorama, it's been harder to get a hold of FIMO Professional in stores, or it's just a very limited amount of colors. So instead, I order the colors I need online, mostly from the Blick Art Store website. Tip number 2 is to make sure your tissue blade is thin and sharp. I have two different blades here. This one is thin and this one is thick. You can tell by the way the blade bends. I usually prefer the thin, shorter tissue blades, but I lost my last ones a few months back and I haven't ordered new ones out of laziness. But here's the difference between the thinner and thicker blade. Compared to the thinner blade, the thicker blade drags the clay down, smooshing it more. Same thing goes for dull blades. Once in a while, I do like to sharpen my blade with a knife sharpener. Here is the cut with the sharp side, and let's pretend that this back part of the thin blade is the blunt version of this blade. And as you can see, cutting it with a quote-unquote blunt blade drags the clay down a bit too, and it kind of made this cool effect. It looks like a motion blur. That doesn't really happen very often, but anyways, bottom line, keep your blade sharp. Tip number 3, temperature. Just like a PP, cold temperature can make the clay cane stiff and warm temperature can make it flaccid. When you reduce your cane, it's going to be in a pretty warm state thanks to all the action that it's getting. Bow chicka wow wow. So before you slice, what you can do is let your cane sit for like maybe 30 minutes to an hour so that it cools down to room temperature.
One day later.
If you live in a place that's like really hot and warm, you can put it in your freezer or fridge. Here's how I used to do it. I would take a scrap piece of paper, fold it in half to give it a little bit more structure, and then fold it into a zigzag shape. The zigzag shape is to prevent the canes from rolling around and to prevent flatness at the bottom. Then I'll cut up my canes into sections if the cane is way too long so that it fits on the paper, and place them in between the zigzags. Hold it underneath in place so that nothing drops, and move it into the fridge or freezer. Leave it in there for a minimum of 15 minutes. I have left my canes in there overnight several times just because I got distracted and then forgot all about it until the next day. When you're ready, take a cane out one at a time and start slicing immediately. The reason I recommend one at a time is because the clay does warm up to room temperature pretty fast, so if you take all of them out at once, they might be warm by the time you get to slicing, the other pieces. Also, there is a specific problem with this when it comes to FIMO clay from my experience, allegedly. Okay, this is just my personal explanation, but whenever I needed to soften up Primo clay, using a few drops of baby oil worked well for me. However, whenever I wanted to soften up FIMO clay, which is rarely because I'm using FIMO because it's firm, right? But anyways, whenever I wanted to soften up FIMO clay, water worked best for me. Now, if you take something cold out of the freezer and leave it out, what happens to it? Condensation. And what is condensation? Water. So if I end up dilly-dallying and I don't cut up my FIMO cane fast enough, the condensation gets to it, making the cane a lot squishier and stickier than before I put it in the freezer. Which is why I have received advice about putting it in the fridge because it's less cold, which means less condensation, and logically, yeah, that sounds perfectly true, but I have not tried it because by the time I got that advice, I just stopped doing the fridge thing at all completely. Back in the day when I first started clay canes, I used to cut really thin slices to make inserts for resin stuff, and thin slices in general warp way more than thicker slices, which is why I had to use the freezer method. But after a year or so, I actually stopped doing the thin slices and I do thicker slices to make them into beads for charms and accessories, which is why I don't do this fridge thing at all anymore. Tip number 4, rotate the cane around while slicing. So what you want to do is slightly rotate the cane in one direction and cut. Rotate, cut, rotate, cut, rotate, cut. It'll kind of distribute the flatness on the bottom. If you keep cutting the same position over and over again, you're pretty much compounding a lot of squish into one area, which will be harder to fix later on. So even though there is still a flat area with the rotating method, you can easily fix it without using too much force from your fingers. Ultimately, in my opinion, more fingering makes the cane look worse. Tip number 5. Practice, practice, practice. I know it sucks to hear because you want to be good on the first try, but trust me, practicing, going through trial and error will be the biggest help. And I think that's all the tips that I have for you guys. I do want to mention that I have seen products online that are designed to help reduce the warping for polymer clay canes, and I have been thinking about investing in a Lucy clay cutter for the past 2 years, but oof, the price is pretty steep, so I don't know. I feel like by now I've gone through so much trial and error and my skills have been getting more and more decent overall that I've convinced myself I don't need it. I'm sure my life will be so much happier with it, but it's I know bottle openers exist, but I've learned to live without one for so long because I use a spoon instead that I've convinced myself I don't need a bottle opener, even though I'm sure a legit bottle opener will make my life a lot better than using a spoon. Anyways, I hope some of these tips might have been helpful for you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay safe and well. Bye bye.